Hi everyone, and welcome back to the next part of this creature creation series. First off, I'd like to apologize for not posting in a very long time. Thank you all for your patience. We've been busy with a very exciting project in collaboration with Bird's Eye Motion Pictures. You can check out on our YouTube channel this pitch trailer that we put together. We're very excited working on that. But now I've got some time available and I decided let's continue with creating this creature. So in this video we're going to cover a whole range of topics. We're going to finish up the model in ZBrush, so we have a base sculpt, and then we're going to retopologize it in order for us to manipulate the character and get some textures on it. This video is about 2 hours long, so leave a comment and let me know if you prefer the long form or shorter videos. Yeah, let us know what you think. Okay, so let's get started on the fins. And for this I decided to use the shadow box. It's not a very useful tool. I don't use it that often, but you can get some interesting shapes from the shadow box. I thought it would be easier than trying to deform the fins from a sphere or a cube or something. So it's pretty easy to use. You just create the shadow box from any tool, any ZBrush tool, and then you just create a mask, and that mask creates the mesh in 2 dimensions. You can get a 3-dimension, but like I said, the shadow box is not that useful when it comes to complex shapes. So as you see, I'm just using the mask lasso tool, and I'm just drawing out the profile shape of this fin. Now, depending on the resolution you have, you can get cleaner lines, but at this stage, all we want is just this basic shape. Now, remember that it's going to create different polygroups for the different sides, so it might be a good idea just to group visible, just to get everything into one shape. I just appended it as a separate subtool. I'm just going to move it. It's the wrong way around. I'm just going into deformation and just rotating it around. Now, right here is something that I did not realize, and that is that the fin is not exactly in the middle. And that's going to cause problems, and I'm going to figure that out in just a second. In later ZBrush versions, this is an older version of ZBrush, something that I really like, and it's the transpose tools that you have there. It works a lot more like tools that you would find in Maya and other software. ZBrush kind of has the tendency of doing something very unique and not conforming to all the other applications. But that's something that I really like, is the new transpose tools. Now I'm struggling because I cannot figure out why I don't have symmetry, and it's because that object is not in the middle. And I kept this in the recording because it's a good idea to see that everybody makes mistakes, everybody struggles with something, and in a minute or two I'm going to figure out why this is happening, and it should actually be blatantly obvious, but sometimes you just you get stuck on such a small thing like the object not being in the center of the character. I'm trying Dynamesh, I'm trying everything, and I can't figure out why. And there I see it's not in the middle. Okay, let's do that again. Import the tool, flip it around, and now we just move it right in the center. And a quick way to get it exactly centered is just to use mirror and weld. So it takes one side, mirrors it exactly to the other side, and just welds the points. And then I can just Dynamesh it again. And there we go. Now, as a happy accident, I actually like this a bit more because I scaled it up quite a bit more than the first attempt. And sometimes you get lucky on your second try, getting scale right and things like that. Sometimes you get better ideas. So I think the lesson here is no matter what you're struggling with is just to push through. Sometimes you end up with something better than what you originally intended. And now symmetry is working. In in ZBrush 2018, you've got the Sculptris Pro tool. That is absolutely brilliant, where you can just sculpt and not worry about the density of the mesh, where it kind of not retopologizes. It decimates the mesh for you, so that you always have geometry to support any detail that you put in. And if this was ZBrush 2018, I would definitely be using Sculptris Pro on this. I'm just blocking out the basic shapes of this. I'm not trying to get in all the details because we're going to retopologize this, and after the fact, after everything has been retopologized, we're going to put in all the details that we want. But for now, we just want to get the basic shape right. I'm just pushing that in a bit. And if you're working on thin mesh like this, it's a good idea to put on masking for the opposite mesh. I can't remember exactly what you call it, backface masking or something like that, so that you don't sculpt on the other side, especially you have symmetry on. And I think that's something that I don't have on here, but I'm really not trying to spend a whole lot of time on this fin. Just searching for shapes and looking at how we're gonna create a base sculpt from which we can retopologize. Now sometimes you've got concept art or something that's very detailed that you can follow exactly along, and you can just look at the concept art and just kind of copy that. But in this case, we don't have a concept art that's detailed to follow along on. So you start sculpting on something like these fins, these spikes that go into these fins, and you kind of have to search for the shape and see what looks good, what works, what does not work. So I just merged that fin back into the uh, rest of the body. Just looking at it from all angles, seeing if it works, is the scale right, uh, does it read well, and now I'm changing that shape. Okay, and just to save time, I'm duplicating that subtool and using it for the other fins. And just in the deformation tab, I'm using the bend, playing around with the S bend, seeing what looks good. Just to get a basic starting point. That's what's really nice about ZBrush, is that you can take a tool, as a subtool, that has a completely different shape and duplicate it and make something new of it. You don't always have to start from scratch, especially if you look at some of the principles of design where, and I hope I'm quoting this right, it's that the greater is to the smallest detail. If you look at the veins on a leaf, uh, those veins have the same shape as the entire tree has. So the design kind of culminates down even into the minute details. If you've got a character that's, let's say, square shaped, um, your your minute details would also represent that square shape. And that's what's nice about ZBrush, is that when you kind of start duplicating your subtools, you inadvertently duplicate that same design, that same shape, and you kind of just deform it just to make it unique. As you can see, it's a completely different shape now from the original film that we started out with, because every time we just duplicate it and start deforming it. But that same design is repeated. And now I'm kind of discovering something new here, and that is that the fins actually look better if it kind of um, creates that shape at the back, like a stingray. I'm just looking at the model again, making sure everything is in proportion, making sure everything works. Now I want to kind of continue with that idea of the stingray fins. So I'm duplicating it again and shaping it, moving it into position. And it's not a bad idea to just take the move brush, uh, make your brush nice and big, and just start searching for the shape. Play around with it. Make a duplicate of it, save a copy, uh, try different things until you find something that's really working for you. They're just masking out the start of the fin to lock it into place, and then I can take a move brush and just start moving it around, seeing what works, where do I need to go with the shape. And also remember to think about your character. This character obviously swims in the ocean. It's the size of that back fin has to be believable in terms of, well, can this fin actually propel her forward? It's not going to read well if you do not believe that that fin can actually propel her. So if you look at this, if you look at the whole character, that back fin is actually much larger than her than the dorsal fin, because the dorsal fin is actually not there for locomotion. It's actually just to stabilize the creature as she's swimming forward. It's actually those back fins that propel her forward. Again, just moving it around, searching for the nice shapes that we can get. Now I've just merged the character down so that I have two subtools, one for the fins and one for the body. That's going to help us later on, especially in retopology, where we have these objects separate, and when we're retopologizing, we can switch between the two. Now it's time to create the forearms and the hands. Now, in terms of hands, in this video, I'm actually building the hands from scratch, showing you exactly what I do if I need to model a hand. But what I have is I've modeled so many hands that I have a whole library full of different types of hands: male hands, female hands, monster hands, long-fingered Dracula hands, all different kinds of shapes. So generally when I work on a character, I just import one of those hands and start deforming them until I get the shape of the character right. But in this case, we'll model something from scratch. I don't know if I've mentioned this in a previous video, but it's a good idea to have images of anatomy open that you can always look at. It's not necessary to learn all the names of all the muscles and everything, but look at the shapes, look at where everything's going, look at where muscle groups articulate. It's just going to help you so much if you study those anatomical points, because that's what's going to make it believable. And of course, in terms of a creature like this that's not human at all, it's humanoid. You can change things. You can accentuate certain muscle groups and even ignore others. But there are basic shapes that make up, for instance, a believable forearm, a believable chest, a believable abdomen. So first get the shapes right, and then you can start changing it and making it unique, and start building a character that really doesn't exist. Because after all, and this is, I think, the most important thing to remember, is that in a character like this, it's not the anatomy is not necessary for believability in the sense that it's made up of the same stuff that we are. It can be anything. The bottom line is that the character needs to be designed in such a way that it feels like it can move, it can exist in the real world. And what better way to look at it than look at a real human, look at anatomy, because you're never going to get a better design than what humans are. Our muscle groups, everything is designed perfectly. And even if you're doing animal characters, study that anatomy. Look at why muscle groups are shaped the way they are. Because they look the way they are because they move in a certain way. Some muscle groups are larger, but in the end we're all the same. We have similar morphology between humans and horses and dogs and cats. We all have the same muscle groups. Everything is exactly the same. All mammals. I think there might be an exception for whales, though, or dolphins. I think there might be. I don't know. I haven't studied dolphins and whales, though. But there might be similarities. I'm quite sure of it. But all mammals, all land mammals, I should say, have exactly the same morphology. Some bones might be shorter or longer. Same with the muscle groups. Some might be bigger, some might be smaller. But we're all the same. We're all built the same. Because we ultimately move in a similar fashion. If you study apes, the only difference in our hands, for instance, is our thumbs, because we've learned to hold pencils, play piano. You can do a lot more than what an ape does. But ultimately, the structure behind it is exactly the same. So for these muscle groups, you can see I've just blocked out all of the major muscle groups, not in each individual muscle, just the groups, to make it believable in terms of where they articulate. And then I'm going in and kind of fixing up everything that I did wrong. That's what's nice about the clay build-up brush, that you can just build up on your clay and carve away at the clay until you get more or less the shape that you want, and then afterwards you can just kind of fix up everything, get everything back into proportion. Now this is kind of a stylistic choice that I made to make the elbow kind of sharp. I thought it just read well. Of this character, I wanted extremely thin arms, very muscular, toned, but thin arms. I really want to go all the way human. So it's almost like thin little sticks. And they had to be extra long. Get that bone in there. Get that to read well. And now we're starting on the hand. I just start with the sphere. And I just dynamesh it just to get rid of those poles that the subtool makes. And I'm just shaping it out. Now something that might also benefit you if you want to model hands is trying to draw it in terms of shapes. Right now I'm not thinking about anatomy, I'm just thinking of shapes. So the palm of your hand is kind of like a wedge shape. So if you look at it from the top, yeah, it really makes a wedge. Look at pictures. Look at pictures of hands and kind of analyze it. Cut off the fingers and see what shape the palm of the hand makes. And then the fingers are really just two pieces of tubes. Especially for females, the last knuckle on the finger rarely moves. It's actually just the first and the second knuckle that actually bends, and that makes for a very feminine look. And all of the fingers except for the thumb really look exactly the same. So I'm modeling one finger and then just duplicating 3 more for the other, to have 4th fingers, and then the thumb I'll create separately, because the thumb, because you have this webbing between the palm and the thumb, that I model separately. And this is what I love about the newer versions of ZBrush, the transpose tools. You're not limited to the access of when you're duplicating it. You can really easy move it around. This is still a struggle, but we get there in the end. Now I'm just trying to get the volume right, just more or less. And because I'm working in different subtools, I'm not really worried about scale. We can always scale it to fit. And now I'm duplicating the other fingers, and we can see that the wedge is not exactly right. So just go in there and fix that up. And of course this hand's going to be huge compared to the body. And another nice tool is the inflate brush, where you can just quickly add volume. Using a nice big brush, you can just quickly brush over it and add volume to that. Now I'm just adding the volume for the bones inside the hand. And if you're new to ZBrush, the thing to remember is to work big and then go small. Don't go right into the detail. Don't go right into the exact shape of the object. Just start with broad strokes. Sometimes just an indication would do. Like right now, this hand doesn't represent anything that looks like a realistic hand. But that's a point that you start with, and you just work from that. I'm just using a sphere, just creating that webbing of the thumb, kind of massaging it into the palm, thinking of where it needs to go, adding volume, taking volume away. It's all the same principles over and over and over. And I just dynamesh them together. As you can see, I use the Damien standard brush just to cut like deep grooves into it, just an indication for myself that this is where I need to go, this is where I need to create volume, this is where I need to create a shape. Eventually everything gets matched together and forms something seamless, but in that process of sculpting, you kind of find the form. Another tip, I guess you could say, is that ZBrush sculpting is a lot like flying an airplane, and it's never forget to fly the plane. And here it's the same. Never forget to sculpt. You constantly need to sculpt. You can never stop sculpting. Now we've progressed to a more final form of it. I didn't want to go into all the minutia of finding the form of the hand. Now I'm working on some of the more detailed pieces, like the bones in the hand, getting all of those shapes right. A nice thing about modeling hands is that you can look at your own hand and just see where can you see tendons, where can you see bone, what are the fleshy bits, where do I need to add volume, where do I need to take volume away. And as you can see with this model, where it's progressed quite a bit, you can still see the lines that I created as just indications for myself where I need to add volume, what shapes I need to create. Those Damien standard strokes are gone now, but you can still see it in the model. Now I'm really just copying my own hand. And something about the Damien standard brush, if you hold Alt and you draw in as opposed to push in, you draw out as opposed to push in, you can alternate between the two and create peaks and valleys. I'm probably putting in more detail than I actually should, considering that this is just our base mesh and we're going to retopologize it. But a lot of this detail will be projected back onto the final mesh, so nothing really goes to waste. But at this stage, you shouldn't spend too much time. I think I'm spending more time than it's really necessary. Shouldn't spend too much time adding details. It's more about getting the form and the shape right. Now, sometimes you need to add some details to really discover the shape of the form. But just don't go overboard. Seems thumb needs a little bit more volume. And there I'm turning on the backface masking because the fingers are so thin that if you use a big brush, you go through to the other side. And if the clay buildup brush doesn't work, you can always just use the move tool and just build volume that way. I'm just hiding the index finger so I can see through and work on the middle finger, adding volume there, and then hiding those two fingers and working on the ring finger. That's what's really nice about ZBrush, is you can so easily hide geometry, hide mesh, and work in the crevices where you otherwise in other software it's a real struggle. That's something in Retopology that we'll look at later. That's a real struggle, is if you need to go into those little crevices and add verts and divisions. It's sometimes very, very, very difficult to see. And here again, I'm just looking at my own hand, seeing where I have these folds and just putting them in. Those lines that I put in for the knuckles at the bottom of the finger, I'm constantly rotating to the side and to match it up with the knuckle. It's not just there for details, it's also an indication for us later on when we're retopologizing to add extra divisions right there, because that's where the finger's going to bend, and if you don't have a reference for retopologizing, then you might have digits that's longer or shorter, and when you start bending the fingers, especially if you're doing a production piece where the character needs to go through animation and all of that, if you don't put the topology on the right knuckle or in the right place, that can seriously hinder any nice deformations you get through joints. You see there, I'm practically destroying the knuckles now because I've got the reference points. I often use the Damien standard brush just to indicate for myself where I need to add detail or where I need to add divisions or whatever I need to do. It's like kind of writing on your model. Look here, sculpt here, add volume here. And there I'm moving that little crease of the thumb because it's not lining up with the last bend of the thumb joint. I'm always making sure that the knuckle and the crease line up, because that's going to influence your retopology. And for adding detail, and I'm actually not supposed to do it right now because I'm going to have to do it again when we've retopologized, but to add those folds on the knuckles, I just use the Damien standard brush, alternating between pushing in and pulling out, and then just using the move brush just to shape those creases to kind of follow the form of the hand. It's just an easy cheat to get some detail in there. Now, if this was a production piece, I would actually build separate geometry for the nails. But in this case, because it's just going to be a still render, I'm just sculpting in the nails with the Damien standard brush. Something that really sells the transition between the hand and the forearm are those creases underneath the hand, and especially the tendons that go into the hand. Just taking away some volume there as well. I think on this piece I decided to make the webbing of the thumb thinner than it actually should be, since it's a character that swims around. It's not that obvious, but it's there. And in the hand, it's actually very apparent that the creases are actually signs of motion. So you can just look at how the hand folds, and then you know exactly where to put the creases. Now, matching up the hand with the rest of the arm. And looking at the whole character. Merging them together, dynameshing them. And now we actually have to put some of that detail back. Now in this case, I'm really going for something that's thin and not quite human. The distance between the wrist and the palm of the hand is not that elongated. But in this case, I thought we'll push that a little bit. And I thought, oh, well, I probably pushed it a bit too far, so I'm just pushing it back in. At this stage, it's good to look at the entire character and seeing whether the scale is right, whether it fits in with the rest of the character. And never judge the size of the hand on the opposite side, because ZBrush's interface kind of distorts a lot. So only look at the hand that's closest to the camera, closest to view, because there are no cameras in ZBrush. I'm just blending in everything that we've sculpted, that we've dynameshed together, getting those tendons back in, making sure everything meshes well. adding some details for the spines. Now this character is very stylized. It's a lot of hard edges, a lot of smooth parts, but that's part of the design of this character. Now we need to start retopologizing. So I just exported this model as an OBJ and imported back into Maya. Just make sure that your scale is the same. So don't resize. Don't do any resizing in Maya, even if the character is way small or way big. At this stage, if you rescale on the character, it's going to influence our ability to reproject in ZBrush. If you do need to scale, put it in a group, scale that, work on the model, and then scale it back to the original size. Now, for the retopology, I'm using the quad draw tool, and there are many applications for doing retopology. I'm using Maya, and I'm just building kind of like a circle around the eye, where I have a midpoint and 2 points on either side. Now these 2 points are going to collapse together in the center of the face, which you can see. Now I'm just duplicating special, and that's duplicating with instance and negative x. So whatever I do on the left side is going to happen on the right side. So I only have to quad draw on the one side, and it's going to mirror over on the other side. Okay, I'm selecting the. That's something I didn't mention. I'm selecting the mesh, the sculpt, and I'm just turning on that little magnet button right at the top, and that constrains all the points to the surface. I'm just drawing out another circle. Holding tab, I believe, you can just drag out edge. Just creating a closed loop. Now, retopology of the face is very specific, actually. Less specific in this instance because we're not going to do any animation on it. But if it's a production piece, the topology of the face is very, very important. It's less about the structures of the muscles. Some people believe that you should create your topology in accordance with the muscle groups of the face, and that's not entirely true. It's creating topology that best deforms in the correct places, like around the eye, around the mouth, the cheeks, the forehead, and depending on the controls that you have on the character depends on where you need to put those divisions. So what I'm doing at that center point of the eye, I'm creating a pole, and bringing it down to create a center point for the mouth, and just bringing it back down to create another center point and a corner point. So the topology for the eyes and the mouth is almost exactly the same. Now I'm creating a midpoint, corner point, and a point on the side, and one more point at the corner of the mouth, so that I have 3 edges for the mouth shape. and then I'm just gonna do exactly the same thing for the bottom lip. Just holding tab, drawing out an edge. That's something that's important, is keeping the top and the bottom exactly the same. If you have 5 divisions at the top and 3 divisions at the bottom, you're going to struggle with deformations. Deformation, as I've said, is less important here because this is just a static piece. But let's say you're doing a concept piece and you're doing this sculpt and you need to make changes. The director wants to see what the mouth looks like open, wants to see the teeth or something, and it's really easy to do in ZBrush because you can just open the mouth. But if your topology is really wacky, you're going to spend a lot of time trying to do just that, just opening up the mouth and trying to do these things. So even if it's just a concept piece, try to keep your topology really clean in terms of deformation, not so much clean in terms of anatomy or the details that you want to put in. Keep deformation in mind, because you're always going to get a request to do something that is weird, that you did not anticipate. So around the ears, again, I'm doing a midpoint, quarter point, and for the top and bottom. So ears, mouth, eyes, exactly the same. And don't worry about getting in all those details. You're just creating the topology that works for deformation. The details will come in afterwards. And also, if your topology is nice and clean, it's really easy to do the UVs for texturing. So I'm just creating 2 points there next to the ear, and I'm going to take that bottom one and bring it out for the jaw in a minute. There we go. So I'm creating that jawline, and you can see I'm creating a pull right at the bottom of the ear, and that pull is going to assist in opening up the jaw if we ever need to do so. It's something that we didn't do in this video because I wanted to show every stage of modeling. But what you often might do is have a base mesh that's already topologized and start sculpting from there. It's a lot faster to do because you get a lot of things for free. Like I said, with the hands, I have a library full of hands that I can just reuse. You can do the same with faces, with torsos, legs, arms, everything. You can just reuse things that have already been topologized, and it's going to really speed up your workflow. It's not a cheat to reuse. Now I'm keeping in mind when I'm going up to the forehead, I'm keeping in mind those 4 faces of the eye, because they need to actually plug in into that shape that I'm making at the forehead, while keeping room for the mesh that we're still going to do for the bridge of the nose. Now I'm just creating big shapes for the center of the face, and just taking that right up into the forehead, just closing everything up and just moving points around. Closing those shapes. Now you can see at the cheek I actually have a pole that's going to form right there. So I'm bringing that piece in the jaw up, and I'm closing that, so I have that pole right at the cheek. Now what I mean about a pole is it's a vert that's connected to 5 faces instead of 4. So normally when you have a quad, you have any vert has 4 faces and a pole has 5. So I'm looking at where I'm placing my poles. It's very important because poles can result in some really ugly deformation. So I'm very careful at where I'm placing my poles. I'm counting off 3 faces for the back of the head because that's going to match up to the forehead. I'm just creating a loop to the back of the head. And continuing that loop of the second and just closing that up. Missing one point. There we go. Had one too many edges there, so I'm just closing that up. And if you hold shift, you can kind of brush on the verts to relax them, so they'll take the neighboring points and just kind of average them. Because the ideal would be to have all the faces exactly the same size. It's not always possible, and I don't do that, but to kind of try at least to keep all of the faces the same size. So as I'm creating a loop, I'm going back, holding shift, and just relaxing some of those verts just to keep them the same size. It's not always going to work, but at least trying. I'm just creating the back of the neck, creating 2 more loops that I can extend back out. Now here, I was pausing there for a second because I needed to think where I'm going to put that pole, because I'm going to have 5 faces just underneath the ear, but that's fine because there's less deformation there, so it's not going to be such a problem. Now I want to create another loop for just below the chin, so I'm creating those extra verts to continue with the jawline, but at the same time go down the throat. So I have extra topology just to be able to go down the throat. And you can see just underneath the chin I have another pole there, and that's going to be fine because the deformation is not going to be that apparent just below the jawline, at least at the chin side. Spreading them out. And now you can see that the faces aren't always the same size, but you try to get them the same size. Now I'm just adding a few more loops for around the eyes. So one loop in each face. I'm just spreading out the verts so that they don't form a straight line. They should form a curve. And I'm doing exactly the same for the mouth. And the forehead. I'm just spreading the verts around just to see if I can get them a little bit more uniform. And there I'm just taking out that one loop. No, I put it back. Now I'm adding some more loops for the back of the head and one for the chin. Just relaxing the verts. Adding more division for the mouth, for the loop of the mouth. And underneath the mouth. And as you're relaxing the verts, you might need to move the border verts just to match. Otherwise, the border verts tend to squish together, like there. There again. And that bottom one, yeah, that one. Yeah, and at the thread you can see that everything is going up, so you just need to reposition the border verts just to match. I'm just creating one vert there, bringing it around, and adding divisions. Now the idea of the nose that you'll see in just a minute is that you want something that kind of loops around. So I'm just creating another row. And then I'm just repositioning that middle edge just to link up to the nose. And then I'm creating another division right there. And I'm just linking it up to the upper lip. Now I'm creating a second row inside the nose. It's going to link up right there, so it's wrapping around. And for the inside of the nose, I'm just kind of filling that in, making loops. And then I'm just closing it off. You can add more detail, maybe push it in a little deeper, in a production piece, I would really push that in quite a bit, because you never know at what camera angle you're going to look at the character. But for this piece, that's sufficient. Now I'm going for the corner of the mouth, for the corner of the nose, and I'm looping that around, and I'm deleting as you see, I'm deleting faces as I go to see where I can link that up. And you really have to be careful not to add too many divisions. Try to keep it as simple as possible. And everything is quads. So far we didn't need to use any triangles yet. Now triangles aren't evil. They are not the worst thing that you can do. Poles in the wrong place, those are the worst things that you can do. As you see there, I'm going to put in, there's a triangle. Now that triangle is not going to bother anybody. It's going to be fine. But a pole in the wrong place, that is, I would have created a pole right there, and I decided no, that needs to disappear. It's not to say, you know, go crazy with triangles, but if a loop terminates in a triangle, that's not the worst thing. That's fine. I'm just matching up the top and the bottom. Sometimes the create face function, it's a little finicky to get right. So sometimes you just need to delete the face next to it and just fill that one in. Just fill in the rest. Now I just want to create kind of like a loop around the shoulder area, and spacing the verts as evenly as possible. I'm just spacing the verts and using the relax function. Might need to add another loop in there, but for now it's fine. And moving the border edges, the border verts into position, up top one as well. Yeah, there I'm adding the loops. And as you can see, it's relatively evenly spaced. I don't have big faces and small faces. They're relatively all in the ballpark of being the same. If this was a production piece, I would create an inside of the mouth, and that's really easy. You just match up the verts and kind of create a sphere for the inside of the mouth. And maybe if you're going into that much detail, especially for creatures, you might want to add a throat, but that's really easy to do. But for this piece, she's not going to open up her mouth. And now for the ear, I'm really just filling in. There's no exact way of doing ears. I'm just kind of following the flow of the geometry. If this was a production piece that and 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 there was going to be some controls for the ears to move them around, I'd probably spend some more time on this and figuring out where exactly the deformations should occur. But so far it's actually looking good. I think you can actually even animate this. Now, retopologizing thin pieces like this is always hard. Um, I think a little later on I'm duplicating it and merging it. Now here I'm creating verts right next to each other because I want that crease for the top spine. And sometimes the snap tool just does not want to work. Now I need to start figuring out how to do the back of the ear because it's gonna start going around. And that pole in the middle of the ear, and again there's another pole. That should be fine, especially for this piece. It's not going to deform that drastically. I think if you spend some time and really think about it, you might be able to get cleaner topology, but for our purposes right now, it's fine. And here you can see the struggle it is to retopologize thin mesh. It, yeah, it's just a nightmare. It's not easy at all. Because in Maya, when you're filling in faces, your camera view needs to see 4 points in order to quad draw. So oftentimes you're actually looking through the object at the back, so you're only seeing 3 points, and then it won't quad draw. And an easy way to get out of that is to extrude an edge, but with thin surfaces oftentimes it snaps to wrong geometry and it's just terrible. But Maya has really come a long way. I remember the times when we didn't have something like this. It quad draw, it didn't exist. There, I'm just terminating everything into triangles, and that's fine. Speaking about the old days, about earlier versions of Maya, where you had to do all of the retopology, uh, you had to do it with extrude edge, and that was terrible. It was so time consuming to retopologize with extrude edge. And there, I need to change my viewpoint so that I can see four points. If you don't see 4 points, it's not gonna quad draw. So you need to change your camera angle so that you have 4 points in view in order to fill that face. Like that. It's not gonna happen. There. It's not gonna. It doesn't want to work because I'm actually looking through the head, through the skull, and then it doesn't want to quad draw. There it quad draws. No, there it is. So every time I need to kind of zoom in just to see the 4 points. And I've decided that this is going to be a terrible way to retopologize. So I deleted those that last row of faces. And I deleted my duplicate on the other side. And now I'm selecting. I duplicated the face. I'm selecting the ear, and I'm just gonna extrude it and keeping the faces together. Remember that. Very important. So I'm kind of manually just moving it and flipping the normals. So I have those two pieces. I'm merging them together. And I'm just using the bridge tool. That doesn't always work. What I did there was I went into the poly display and I just turned on show the border edges. Just make that thicker so you can see the border edges a lot better. Okay, that's not half bad. And remember, when you're doing that duplicate special, you just need to have the point right at the center. So I'm just using a cylinder just to get a middle point. I'm just putting my pivot point right at the center, and then you can duplicate special. And as you quad draw and you need to move that pivot point, don't use this model's center point because it's not the true center. You need to use the world center, not this object center. See there, I need to see 4 points. It's just not working. But otherwise, the quad draw tool is really useful. I now have more edges on the left side than I have on the right, so I kind of need to figure this out. I don't want to really add more geometry to the back of the head. I need to terminate these edges in such a way that that it kind of makes sense without completely destroying the geometry. So I'm thinking about loops, and loops might work, especially considering there's a hole for the ear. And when you're in a situation where you have more edges on one side than the other, sometimes the only solution is a triangle. There we go. So the head is retopologized. Now we need to move on to the rest of the body. Now the easiest way to retopologize the breasts is just to take a sphere and lower the edge loops, snap it right on there, and just position it more or less, and just merge it to the other mesh. And I'm just using the relax tool, and it just snaps right onto the surface, and that way you get your loops for free. And again, I'm just making sure my pivot is exactly world center, not object center, but world center. And then I can duplicate special again. Something to keep in mind when retopologizing the body is to keep the torso, the arms, and if your character has legs, their legs, keep them like cylinders, meaning your edges need to go into loops. Be careful of spirals because that's not gonna work for you. That's going to give terrible deformation. And at this point, I'm not worried about any of the detail of the model, so I'm not trying to follow the flow of the muscles, because that's not going to help us with deformation. All of that detail we're going to bake into the retopologized mesh. Now what I'm aiming for here in the shoulder is to avoid a pole, but also create a loop around the shoulder that goes around the armpit. And that takes some figuring out. You can see I'm adding in a triangle, and that triangle is not going to help us. So I'm making a little room and just finishing that out. So as you can see, for the shoulder, it creates a loop that goes around underneath the arm. I'm just going back again. Up into the neck. And there I would have ended up in a triangle again, so I just took away that one face. I'm just spacing that out again. Sometimes what you had in mind doesn't work out, and you just delete all the faces and just rebuild that piece. And there we go. That was sort of one of the hard parts of retopologizing the character. From there on, the rest of the arm is really easy. The next difficult piece would be the hands. And from here on, I can just create loops for the torso. So I'm just really taking it out. And this time I am following that muscle group back there. If I don't follow that, it's we're gonna lose a lot of the detail. And this is similar to how you would retopologize a character with legs, except that both legs also need to end up in loops. So there I can just add divisions, relax the verts a bit, fix the border verts, and there we can see the torso. And for the arm, I'm just extruding the edge, just taking it out more or less to where the elbow is. And then I can just relax those points onto the mesh and add some divisions. And again, just extrude right up to the wrist, spacing out the verts and adding divisions. And now for the hand, I'm doing exactly the same thing as we did for the mouth. I'm creating a top, a bottom, a left, a right, and then I'm going to divide it into quarters. So right there I have kind of like a cube. If you can see, there's a cube. And then I'm splitting each face in half so that we have 2, 4, 6, 8 faces. Now the fingers are really tricky, especially in Maya. I don't know, there are other software packages like Topogun and yeah, I can't think of any other right now. I don't know how they work, but in Maya it's really difficult to close that face if you don't see the 4 points. And with fingers, that's really a bother, because if you look through another finger you don't see the 4th point, and then you can't close the gap. For the nail, I just created a loop around the nail, and just closing it off right there. And I'm just adding additional points, one loop for the fleshy bit of the finger and 2 loops at every knuckle. Remember, we're also going to smooth this, so for every face that we see, um, it's gonna double. So where I have 2 faces for the knuckles, I'm actually going to have 4 faces for the knuckles as soon as it's smooth. And for the fleshy bits, I have 2 faces, so it's going to be, yeah, it's also going to be 4 faces. I'm just keeping everything in loops. Adding the divisions for the fingers. And I'm just connecting the 2 fingers together and just splitting it in half. And for this finger, I'm actually drawing all the points, which is a terrible idea. First creating the cube. And there I can see 4 faces, so I need to extrude 1 face and then create the cube. Now I'm splitting it. I'm just taking that edge around for the nail and splitting it in half. And just continuing the loop and closing it off. That's it. Adding divisions and connecting the 2 fingers and splitting it in half. That way you have a very uniform topology on all the fingers. So what you get on one finger is what you're going to get on the next finger, and that really helps, especially if you're rigging a character. That's really going to help you. And this time I decided, let's take the cube right up to the end and split it afterwards. It's actually much easier. Something I might have forgotten to mention is that the model that I took from ZBrush to Maya, I first decimated it just to get it to around 400,000 polys, and that way we retain some of the detail, but it's fast enough to retopologize. So just use the animation master. Sorry, the decimation. What is it? Decimation master, I think. Yeah, and just decimate the figure before you bring it into Maya. Otherwise, the mesh is going to be way too big or way too heavy. And the same thing with the thumb. I'm also creating a cube. I'm just taking that around and splitting it up. Exact same procedure. And I forgot the nail. It's creating the loop for the nail, connecting that back up, and closing it off. Adding divisions. Now I'm taking that top face and connecting it to the index finger. And what we have here now is that fleshy bit between each finger. I'm terminating that into a triangle. So I have two triangles right there. And I'm doing the same thing for the top. And sometimes what I do is I just smooth the mesh. In Maya you can just press 3 and it will give you a smooth preview. That way you can see if there are any weird deformations, especially when you're dealing with triangles and poles. You can just use the smooth and just look at it and see if anything is weird. Now the tricky bit comes in here where we need to match the topology that we have in the arm, in the wrist rather, with the faces that we have in the hand. And that requires adding in additional triangles. And in this case, I'm creating, I'm redirecting the flow of the topology. You can see there redirecting it. And there I have a triangle. But that's fine, especially for this character where we're not going to have heavy animation and stuff like that. If it's a production piece, you'd want to spend more time and actually figuring out how to match the two pieces of geometry a little better. And now I'm just merging the two sides, the left and the right side. Just welding all those verts. So we have a single mesh. The reason I'm doing that is because I want to loop for the tail. So just extruding all the edges. I'm just taking that loop, shrinking it, moving it. I'm not taking it all the way to the bottom because I'm going to create a sphere to cap that. And I'm splitting up the geometry again. I'm just moving the verts around just to space them out evenly. Adding additional loops. Now, the image that I have in mind doesn't involve the tail, so I didn't spend that much time on the topology of the tail. But what you want is more of square edges rather than these elongated edges, because we're going to lose a lot of resolution for texturing. All I did there was just create a sphere with equal amount of spans as the tail, and just merge the two meshes together, and we can just quad draw everything. Alright, now I'm deleting these faces to create a hole where we can add the tail, and that's why we kept the fins and the tail separate in separate polygroups or separate subtools. So this way I can hide the body and just focus on the fins. So I'm just creating a loop all the way around. Now this shape is a little weird, so I just went up to about halfway, and that way we can try to create that same shape. So I'm creating an additional loop there because of that one spine sticking out. And sometimes you're thinking about doing it a certain way, and then you realize it doesn't quite work out, and then you just start over again. And I realized that these spines that we modeled into the base mesh, um, that's not quite going to work for us. I'm not going to be able to retopologize all of that detail. Um, I mean, I suppose you can if you're willing to spend that much time on it. Um, but for this, I just figured, well, let's just create something like this, and we can go back into ZBrush and just add those spines back in. Now I'm just merging those edges together again. And there we have our very crude, basic dorsal fin. Now you might wonder why I'm merging the edges and then deleting it the other side again. The reason is that symmetry, that central line. We want to get that center line exactly correct. So by merging the edges, we're all of those border edges are snapped to the middle, and if we delete the other side again, our starting point is going to be exactly in the middle. This time I didn't bother with all of those details, but I'm realizing that I need to add some divisions to the tail. And more divisions. And I'm going to need one more there. And another one there. Okay. Actually, just close it off with a pole, and that's going to be fine. And again, I'm just merging all those edges, just get the center point exactly in the middle. Now for these fins, I'm just working on one side, and I need to move the verts around a little bit just to be able to cut in that hole. And I just hit the high-res mesh, the sculpt mesh, just so I can see through it. You can hide that mesh while that little magnet button is activated. You can hide the mesh, and it'll still snap to that geometry, even if it's hidden. Now this fin here is a real challenge. Getting those verts to snap to the right place, it's a nightmare. And I decided that's not working. I left all of this in the recording so that you can see all the mistakes that I make on a daily basis. You try something and it doesn't work out, and you have to try something else. So this time I took a different approach and just kind of manually placed the verts in their respective points. And just close the faces. Move some of the edges around just to space it out. And there we go. Now it's just the bottom fin. And again, I'm just looking for that loop where I can insert a hole. Getting rid of those faces. And this time I decided let's start off by extruding it. And I'm adding a loop there. I think I'm gonna extrude a face there just to get that shape of that stingray fin. Yeah, there we go. Just extruding that one face and adding divisions, manually shaping it. And these are our final fins. Just trying to find that loop where I can cut into it. And it's important to create that loop and not just coming right out and extruding it, because that loop is actually going to help us with the deformation, especially when you're smoothing the model like we're going to do. It really helps to get that shape right. Adding more divisions, just moving around the points. Now I'm just closing that extrusion we did. Okay, selecting that face, extruding it exactly like we did before, snapping it to the base, or the tip I should say, and adding divisions, but still keeping it low resolution. Nothing fancy. All of the detail we're going to bake in. And just combine the mesh, stitch it up, and then we have our retopologized mesh. Okay, so it's about 2 hours now, so in the next video we're going to continue baking the reprojecting all of the detail back onto this retopologized mesh, and then we're going to sculpt a little bit more, adding details, getting our UVs correct, and then the fun part, and that's the texturing. We're going to use ZBrush for texturing. So everything is going to be done in ZBrush, no Photoshop work, nothing like that. If it's a production piece, I would handle it a bit differently. In fact, our texture artist would most likely use a combination of ZBrush, Substance Painter, Photoshop, and whatever they need to do. But for this piece, I'm going to use a slightly different technique, and I think you're going to enjoy it. And please let us know in the comment section whether you like this new 2-hour-long videos, or whether you like the shorter versions better. And please make sure to check out the pitch trailer that we've posted, and leave your comments. So I'll see you in the next video. Thank you for watching.